I think we have to realize that immigration is a great resource, has great potentials, and immigration was essentially free up until 1914. And if you ask anyone, well, there aren't many around anymore, but if you ask anyone, was it good or bad up until that point? Most people would say it's good. You know, they contributed to this country, they worked, and they built this country, right? Some of my ancestors, I'm from Sweden, came here and they worked. Now, if you ask anyone today, should immigration be free? Most people will say, no, 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 that's not possible. Well, why is that? Well, it is because today there is a welfare state. We can't have a situation where everyone in this country is entitled to certain benefits. Immigration still benefits this country, but only when it's illegal. And that's hypocritical, isn't it? That people have to come here and sneak in illegally and take the jobs that none of us in here today want to take. So we need some real reform here, I think.
I feel like it's a little more complicated than that, but I do want to give you all credit for actually hitting the nail on the head in a couple of ways. But the reason I say that is that you know, the DREAM Act, obviously the president's very passionate about getting passed, and that was one of his greatest disappointments of that time period last year when it didn't pass. Really, you know, I was, you know, we were all in the West Wing that Saturday when that vote went down, and it was devastating, I think, to a lot of us, and certainly to the folks that it affects. But you touched on this, Travis, which was that this concept, and this is something that has been nicely bipartisan, I think, especially with young people. When we're going to college campuses, we hear, you know, we've done roundtables with some college Republican folks who will say, you know, we just let folks in from other countries, and then we, you know, they have access to our institutions of higher learning, and then they go back and they go off to India and China and they compete against us. And then you've got, you know, folks on the left who say, you know, we attract the best and the brightest, and then we just kick them out with their fancy degrees. And both are true. I mean, we do attract the best and the brightest, and we do kick them out, and they do go and compete against us. And given the fiscal realities and the competitive nature of particularly the rise in technology and competitiveness from our friends over in Asia, I mean, we can't afford to not act on comprehensive immigration reform for, I think, all of the reasons and all of the issues that you all outlined. But the economic impacts, not just on food production and you know, folks that pick vegetables, but also on the qualified labor side, or the skilled labor side rather, it could be devastating if we don't act.
I think if I could end, so again, immigration is a very complex issue, and I think that we can see through the history of immigration policy that often our policy is very reactive. So we're reactive in a certain time period with public sentiment, and we don't really, or have not yet, constructed a policy that is comprehensive or forward-thinking. And so, I mean, the DREAM Act, again, for the most part, a lot of people are in favor of it. It's bipartisan. But there are, and even though that legislation is the responsibility of Congress, there are some things that I believe that the president can do. So right now he is being asked by a lot of immigration advocates to stop deportation of Dreamers or DREAM-eligible students. This is a very personal issue to me because I have many undocumented students, and I'm a part of an immigrant youth network in the state of Florida, and I see the struggles of these students in their daily lives and their family, and how much education means to them. I have friends that have several degrees and can't do anything with them, and I get to go on, with college and do whatever I need to do, but my friends are left behind.
One of the things that I would look at is the change in investments that the federal government's making in things like STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math investments, particularly in low-income schools. And also the programs both through the Department of Education, through the White House, the Coming Up Taller program, things that, even the boards and commissions like the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities are doing to not just throw money or reward schools, but actually strategically look at which schools are doing well and how we can, narrow that gap from $7, $7, $1 gap.
I think another problem we also have in our communities is that, people just don't get engaged civically anymore, because I went to high school in South Carolina. I didn't get taught civics. I didn't get civics at all in my high school, how our government worked, how I could get involved in government. And a lot of high school's children that I speak to now don't have that either. They don't know about, coming to events like this, or how they can, email their senator, now Facebook their senator, stuff like that, and how they can get involved, and how their involvement is going to change their community, and how their voice is the reason stuff will happen in their communities. And I feel that, most of us, everyone here is obviously civically engaged. We care about what's going on in our government. But a lot of people these days are just too busy. They don't have the time. They don't have the money to take off of work to come to events like this. And then it starts when you're young, is, you know, you don't pay attention to what's going on in the news, and in high school they're not teaching you, you know, civics and like government responsibility and your responsibility as a citizen of your country. I think that also weakens our communities because it doesn't give a lot of feedback from the people who are most in need.
I'm actually really impressed with this trend because usually when we sit down with folks to talk about education, particularly with college students, the trends that come up are things like Pell Grants and financial aid at the collegiate level. And I know that in the conversation we had before we sat down here, you know, a lot of that came up. But in terms of pre-college, I think, you know, if you kind of listen to all the different pieces of what folks are saying, you're hitting the nail right on the head, which is that it's a holistic, kind of comprehensive approach that folks need to tackle. And a lot of it is the question of state versus federal responsibility, or who actually has jurisdiction over certain things. So I'm not as familiar with the Florida-specific items as I am with kind of the revamping as a whole. But to the points that you all made about sort of competitive grant making or competitive resources, one of the president's restructuring in the Department of Education is focusing around competitive buckets. So rather than, as somebody had said, you know, either throwing money at the problem on one side or the other, retooling it, you know, not just going through different budgets with a bludgeon and saying, let's get rid of this and let's amp up this, but really going through with a scalpel and saying, you know, what are the smartest choices we're making? What are the metrics that we're using to actually figure out who's getting what money and how, so that we're not just either throwing money at the problem with zero accountability, but combining that with what are the conversations we're having with the teachers' unions, what are the conversations we're having at the local and state level. Thankfully, in some respects, I don't handle policy because it sounds like a very daunting task, but it's definitely interesting to kind of overhear these things and also to have a say. And, you know, when I have the opportunity to go back to DC tomorrow to share with the policy team that these are things that, you know, are certainly resonating. But I would also kind of, you know, urge you all to, if you've got a question specifically about teachers and kind of what, on the federal side at least, which is what I can speak to, what folks are doing on that. Teach.gov is a website that was launched that, you know, again, going back to the concept of using the bully pulpit to actually encourage folks who want to give back to their communities. I think the one thing that previous generations didn't have that this generation has going for it is that it's the most service-driven and the most innovative and creative generation that we've ever seen. And that's no small feat given the fiscal realities of the day, right? So knowing that this generation actually has such a huge opportunity and a desire to serve, I think it's a great opportunity for you all to take this conversation, not just for the 20-minute block, Caesar, that I hope I'm not cutting off, but to really meet with, you know, local school boards. When you guys go back home, I know summer's just around the corner. You know, what are you going to do? What are the kind of takeaways, which, you know, I assume I want to hear about for all three of these. So I'll save that piece for later on, but definitely something to think about. A couple things that we're kind of hearing, and I would urge you guys, you know, when you're looking at these issues. How are you, sir? Hey, good. Yeah, how are you? Good to see you. So we're just wrapping up a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to you. You know, when you're trying to figure out kind of how to plug in and you're trying to make the case for a lot of these things, look at the reasons why, whether it's your local elected official, you know, folks on the national side, obviously the White House or the federal government. Why are they making certain investments, and what are the things that they're trying to get out of it? I know that, you know, when we talk about investments in science, technology, engineering, and math, very few folks talk about how that makes us more competitive. And there was a meeting I was in where someone said, you know, well, why isn't the White House trying to incentivize the private sector to bring jobs back to the United States? I heard this great story of, you know, White House staff talking to the folks at Apple and saying, what do we have to do to convince you to produce iPods and iPads here in America? You know, is it really the cost of labor? Is it really the cost of the environment? We don't necessarily buy it. We think that these are essentially luxury products. The consumer will easily pay an extra couple of bucks to buy something that's made in the United States. It's not going to affect your bottom line. And they said, no, it's not. The reason why we produce iPods and iPads in China is because of the 30 to 300,000 mid-level engineers that need to be on site in these plants. And we don't have 30 to 300,000 mid-level engineers in the United States. So it's not just an abstract of what we need to do to encourage and incentivize folks to, you know, be more civically engaged or to make certain investments in education. It's actually affecting our competitiveness and our security moving forward. So I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but when you hear that the stakes are high and then maybe you turn on the news and you see the silliness of the mudslinging. I'm the first one to say don't pay attention to the mudslinging, because if that's all we get bogged down with, we're not going to focus on the real solution. So I think it's great to hear everything that you guys are doing, and just kind of think about it strategically, because your voice definitely matters. I don't want to talk while you're next to me, sir, so I'll defer to you.
Well, no, I want this to continue as long as it can. I think this is a powerful example of active civic participation, and the Graham Center is very honored to have hosted one of the 100 Youth Roundtables for the White House. This is exactly what we are trying to do, to train citizens to be effective in bringing people together, solve problems, do things that are in the common good. We do this kind of thing all the time, and I hope that you might come back sometime to see some of our other programs here at the center.
I would love to.
You see that commitment?
I would love to. I love it down here. It's always a warm welcome, and thank you for hosting us here. I know that everyone at the White House was very excited that we had the chance to put something like this together with you all.